Old houses have a way of captivating our imaginations, with their hidden histories and faded grandeur. Little did I know that my decision to purchase Blackwood Manor, a seemingly charming Victorian-era home, would plunge me into a nightmare that defied explanation. As I recount my experience, I hope to shed light on the sinister forces that can lurk within the walls of an old house. It all began when I stumbled upon a real estate listing for Blackwood Manor. Nestled at the edge of a sleepy town, the house stood as a relic of a bygone era, its ornate architecture and sprawling grounds beckoning me. Intrigued by the prospect of restoring a piece of history, I decided to make it my new home. From the moment I set foot on the property, I felt an inexplicable sense of unease. The air was heavy with an unnatural stillness, and the once vibrant garden had fallen into a state of disarray. But I dismissed these initial impressions as mere jitters and eagerly set to work on the renovations. As I delved into the restoration of Blackwood Manor, I discovered countless relics of the past: yellowed newspapers, vintage photographs, and faded love letters hidden within the walls. Each discovery added to the house's mystique, and I became consumed by the desire to uncover its secrets. The first sign that something was amiss came one night as I lay in bed, the creaking of the old house lulling me into a fitful sleep. I was awoken by a strange sensation, the feeling of being watched. I sat up, my heart racing, and scanned the dimly lit room. And there, at the foot of my bed, stood a figure, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It had no discernible features, just an amorphous mass that seemed to shift and contort. I blinked, convinced that it was a trick of the light, but the figure remained. Panic surged through me as the shadowy presence moved closer, its movements slow and deliberate. It seemed to glide across the room, its form elongating and then retracting. I wanted to scream, to flee, but my body was frozen in terror. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, dissipating into the darkness. I sat there trembling, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just witnessed. It couldn't have been real, I told myself, a mere product of my overactive imagination. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to experience a series of increasingly bizarre occurrences. Objects would inexplicably move on their own, a book sliding off a shelf, a chair overturning in an empty room. The air in the house grew icy cold, and the sound of disembodied footsteps echoed through the hallways at night. I sought solace in the town's residents, hoping to uncover the history of Blackwood Manor and the source of its supernatural phenomena. But the mere mention of the house sent shivers down their spines, and they spoke of it in hushed tones. One elderly resident, Mrs. Granger, finally broke her silence and shared a chilling tale. The story of a family that had once lived in Blackwood Manor, a family plagued by tragedy and madness. It was said that they had dabbled in the occult, conducting dark rituals in the depths of the house. As Mrs. Granger recounted the tale, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me. It seemed that the malevolent forces that had plagued the family had not left the house, but instead they had lingered, growing stronger with each passing year. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into the history of the house, scouring archives and records for any mention of the Blackwood family. What I discovered was a harrowing account of a family torn apart by madness and despair. The patriarch, Elijah Blackwood, had been a reclusive scholar with a fascination for the occult. He had filled the house with arcane tomes and artifacts, conducting experiments that pushed the boundaries of sanity. His wife, Abigail, had suffered from nightmarish visions, her once bright eyes clouded with madness. But it was their daughter, Amelia, who had borne the brunt of the house's malevolence. She had been plagued by sinister apparitions and tormented by voices that whispered in the dead of night. Her descent into madness had been swift and brutal, and she had met a tragic end within the house's walls. The more I uncovered, the more I became convinced that the malevolent forces that had tormented the Blackwood family were still very much present. I felt as though I had unwittingly become a part of their tragic history, and the house had no intention of letting me go. One evening, as I scoured the house's library for clues, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment within an ancient bookcase. Inside, I found a journal, Amelia's journal. Its pages were filled with the ramblings of a tormented soul, the desperate scribblings of a young woman on the brink of madness. As I read her words, I felt a deep sense of sorrow and empathy for Amelia. She had been a victim of the house's dark forces, a pawn in a game she couldn't understand. She had left behind a chilling account of her encounters with shadowy figures and whispered incantations that seemed to seep from the very walls. Determined to confront the malevolent presence within the house, I enlisted the help of a paranormal investigator, Dr. Samuel Monroe. Together, we conducted a series of seances and investigations, hoping to communicate with the restless spirits that dwelled within. During one particularly intense seance, we made contact with Amelia's tormented spirit. Her voice, filled with anguish and longing, echoed through the room. She begged for release, for someone to free her from the house's grasp. As we continued our investigations, the house itself seemed to rebel against our presence. Doors slammed shut of their own accord, and the walls pulsed with an otherworldly energy. Dr. Monroe was convinced that the house was a portal to the spirit world, a conduit for dark entities that fed on fear and despair. One fateful night, as we conducted a seance in the heart of the house, a malevolent force revealed itself. The temperature plummeted and the room was plunged into darkness. And then, with a deafening roar, the house seemed to come alive. The walls shook, and the very foundation of the house groaned in protest. Dr. Monroe and I clung to each other, our hearts pounding, as a cacophony of voices filled the air. The anguished cries of the Blackwood family, and the sinister laughter of the malevolent entities that held them captive. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. The house itself was a sentient being, a malevolent force that had trapped the souls of the Blackwood family and countless others within its walls. It thrived on their suffering, feeding off their fear and despair. With every ounce of strength, Dr. Monroe and I fought to break free from the house's grasp. We called upon the spirits of the Blackwood family, beseeching them to find peace and release from their torment. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. The temperature returned to normal, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. We were left shaken and exhausted, but we knew that we had made a difference. We had helped the tormented spirits find a measure of peace. In the days that followed, I made the painful decision to leave Blackwood Manor behind. The house had become a prison of malevolence and despair, a place where the living and the dead were bound in a never-ending nightmare. As I walked away from the house, I couldn't help but wonder if it would ever find peace, if the malevolent force that dwelled within its walls would ever be vanquished. One thing was certain. The old house held secrets that would forever remain shrouded in darkness, a testament to the horrors that can lurk within the most innocuous of facades.